Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099 and I am here to talk about a graphic novel, Superman, That Healing Touch. About a month ago, 2 months ago, I did a review of Superman Unconventional Warfare. That was written by Greg Rucka. It was the first volume in a somewhat lengthy run on Superman that he did in the mid-2000s. I actually thought really highly of that book. I would recommend it to anyone who's looking to get into Superman. And this book is the follow-up. This comes immediately after Unconventional Warfare. And that book introduced a new villain called Ruin, and we don't know who it is supposed to be. This book kind of builds on it a little bit, but ultimately we still don't know who Ruin is at the end of the book. This book also introduces two new versions of the Parasite, that green guy and this purple lady. And I really don't care about these characters that much. It doesn't feel like Greg Rucka is trying to introduce two brand new villains into the Superman mythos. It really feels more like he's creating these two villains and then he's dealing with them in this story. But I don't feel like these characters are ever going to show up in Greg Rucka's run or in any run after this. In fact, I haven't looked this up or anything, but I'm pretty sure these characters are not going to show up after this book. So it doesn't really feel like Greg Rucka is expanding the Superman mythos like it was in Unconventional Warfare. In that volume, he introduced two new characters who are kind of supporting characters, one for Superman, one for Clark Kent, and it really felt like he was trying to shake things up without making things drastically different. He was still working within the confines of what we think of as Superman, but he was trying to make things a little bit new and different. He was giving Clark Kent a new job with the Daily Planet, and as such he had a new supporting character to work with there. Then he was having Clark Kent work with the police department of Metropolis so that he would go out and report on crimes as they were happening. So I really felt like Rucka was trying to put a new spin on the Superman mythos, and this was a certain spin that could be worked out so that you could tell many different stories with it. Here, I feel like he's just adding two characters and then taking them away at the end of the story. Not a problem. Not every writer is obligated to add characters who are going to stay and you can tell many stories with them after the writer leaves. A writer doesn't have to do that. However, I really feel like this is a little bit of a step down from Unconventional Warfare in that Rucka is just adding these characters and then once he's done using them, he puts them away so that we don't get to see them again. I really would have liked for him to have found a way to make these guys permanent additions to Superman's Rogues Gallery so that we can kind of see them develop as villains over the years. Also, another thing this book does that I don't really care for, we get Mr. Mixius Spitlick two more times in this book. I don't remember if I mentioned this in my review of Unconventional Warfare, but Mr. Mixius Spitlick, he does appear in that book and he warns Superman, hey, something very big is coming down the line. Then he shows up two more times in this book. And I realized over the course of reading this book that I really hate this character. I don't really think that he's all that interesting. I think basically writers who use Mixius Spitlick, they're doing the same things with him now that they were doing back in the 1950s when he was first introduced. Actually, I think he was maybe introduced in the 1940s, but the point is, Mr. Mixius Spitlick really hasn't changed all that much. Now, sometimes he's played more as a mean character, less kindly, if you will. In this book, he's really more of a friendly annoyance. He's not so much a full-on enemy that you have to deal with and he's going to destroy all of Metropolis if Superman doesn't play with him. He really does feel like a friend to Superman who just happens to be a little bit annoying. So I guess there are certain ways to write him, but he still feels like an annoying character who doesn't really add anything to this book. I don't really care for the character. He's the kind of guy I wouldn't mind seeing him once every 5 years. So if he shows up in Unconventional Warfare, I don't want to see Mr. Mixius Spitlick in any title for 5 more years. And I'm sure other people feel that way. I know there are writers out there who really like this character, but for me, he's just not a character that I have to see all that often. And it really feels like after the one appearance in Unconventional Warfare, and then the 2 appearances in this book, it feels like Rucka is trying to turn this guy into a recurring character. And that just does not sit well with me at all. And then there was one more thing about this book I did not really care for. This was happening right around the same time as Identity Crisis, and this book took an entire issue to kind of deal with that. We have Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman all kind of arguing with each other about how the situation with Sue Dibney and Dr. Light should have been handled. And if you haven't read Identity Crisis, I'm going to say don't worry about it. It's not exactly what I would call a good story. I may need to do a full-blown video with that someday. I've seen wildly different opinions on this. I've seen some people say it's fantastic. I've seen some people say that it's really, really awful. And admittedly, I used to like the story a lot more than I do now. Now I don't care for it as much, and I don't really care for reading a Superman book and then everything is pretty much interrupted so that these 3 characters can argue about how something should have been handled sometime in the distant past. I didn't really need to see that, especially since up until now, this book felt very self-contained. It didn't feel like it was part of what was going on with the DC Universe. And as a rule of thumb, I don't really like it when I'm reading something and it feels self-contained, and then suddenly, oh, I don't understand what's going on here. Oh, you mean I have to go and read the 7-issue Identity Crisis miniseries? Great, that's going to cost me more money. Now, as it turns out, I own Identity Crisis, but I haven't read that book in almost a decade. But I don't really feel like it's fair to me when I start reading this Superman book and then Identity Crisis starts horning in, and I don't really understand what these characters are arguing about because it's been so long since I've read the story. Now, admittedly, this might not even be Greg Rucka's fault. I'm not really sure if this is something where an editor said, listen, Identity Crisis is going on right now, you're going to have to reference it in some way, and Greg Rucka says, fine. Or if Greg Rucka was like, hey, I would really like to do something with Identity Crisis, which is going on right now, and the editor says, sure, go do whatever you want to do. I don't know which of these situations is what happened. Either way, I'm not really happy about it. I would much rather read Superman and just read Superman without having to worry about some subplot from another story that's going on at the same time. That's just me. I know I am in the minority here because if I wasn't, if everyone hated this as much as I did, we would not have crossovers in comic books like we do. But since we do have this, it's like a pandemic, well, clearly I am in the minority here. Now, I know I've complained about quite a few things here, but I actually did not hate this book. It just wasn't as good as Unconventional Warfare. The writing is still solid. I really love what Rucka is doing with Lois and Clark. I love the kind of interplay that we've got between these two. I'm curious about the Pete Ross subplot that's going on here. I won't talk much about it because I do think you guys should still read this book. Even though it's not as good as Unconventional Warfare, it's still pretty decent. It's just, I don't really like Mr. Mixius Spitlick, and since a third of this book deals with him, that was kind of a con in my opinion, and I don't really like the Identity Crisis stuff, so that was also a con. But other than that, this is not a bad story. It's just not a fantastic story either. If you asked me to list the top 30 Superman stories, I doubt that this would show up on that list. It's not a bad story, though. I want to hammer that home. I want to make sure you understand, even though I've spent most of this video complaining about this book, it is not bad. I do think that it's pretty okay. I'm kind of hoping whenever I get the third book in Greg Rucka's run on Superman, I hope that it kind of picks up again and kind of is more measurable to Unconventional Warfare. I really feel like Rucka is an exceptional writer. I think he has done some fantastic stuff already on Superman, and I know that he's got a good little run left to go. I know that the Adventures of Superman series, which is what's collected in here, it ended after a couple volumes after this one. But then I know Rucka went on to write another Superman series after Infinite Crisis. So even after I finish this Adventures of Superman run from Rucka, I'm probably going to keep going because I'm really digging what he's doing here. Even though this one, in my humble, is still a little bit of a step down. So that was what I thought of this book. Have you guys read this book? Did you like it? Dislike it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you liked this video, if you found the review informative, I would encourage you to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will be back tomorrow with a different kind of video. So until then, I'll catch you guys later. Have a great day.